So we proceed. The Free Market Foundation is this afternoon hosting Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter on its podcast channel titled A View from the Top. De Ruyter will discuss Eskom's current state of affairs. The Free Market Foundation is an independent, non-profit policy organisation that promotes sound economic policies and the principles of good law. Let's take you straight to that discussion.
Largest coal-fired power stations in the world. And the idea behind going bigger and bigger is that you get economies of scale that you otherwise lose by having a distributed generation system, which is how it worked in the old days when Edison had a power plant every couple of city blocks or so, distributing DC power directly. Now, these economies of scale, however, came with a significant risk, and that is the project execution risk that is attendant on every mega project. And our own two projects, both Medupi and Kusile, have clearly suffered from some of those risks manifesting themselves. And this is not unique to South Africa. There are many international examples of these mega projects suffering from cost overruns, schedule delays, and so forth. So the advent of decentralization in power generation is quite an exciting trend. And that is largely due to the fact that you've got these solar panels and wind turbines that are essentially mini power plants that can be mass produced and they can be rolled out to wherever conditions are favorable. And you therefore have a trend where increasingly people are able to generate electricity on their own rooftops. And that is a trend that I think is going to accelerate and is going to continue to grow as costs continue to come down. So in addition to decentralization, we also have this phenomenon called democratization. And democratization means that you have far more choice. It used to be that buying electricity was essentially Hobson's choice. You had to go to your local distributor, whether that be Eskom or your local municipality, but that was it. You had a choice. You still only have those choices. But today you now have the option to go partially or completely off-grid. That comes at a cost. You have to make a capital investment. But in the future, it is very easy to contemplate a scenario where we have different generation activities going on. You may find that you may want to buy from a particular generator because you like the technology, you like its greenness or it's not greenness. That's entirely up to you. So there's a lot more choice. And then, of course, as we've seen in developed markets, you find that there is a lot of emphasis on choice at distribution level. So you're able to choose who you buy your electricity from. And there are various special offers available from time to time. So there's competition in the distribution marketplace. So it's a very big change from, again, the old vertically integrated monolithic type of utility that we've become used to in South Africa. And then the last D is also a very important trend, and that is digitalization. So increasingly what we find are smart meters that are sufficiently intelligent to accommodate various time of use tariffs, to manage different pieces of kit in a household or in a factory to ensure that electricity consumption is optimized according to the wishes and the needs of the individual customer. You also have the opportunity to look at a completely digitalized market. So, for example, in a market like Germany, you have a real-time trading platform that makes a market on something like 4 times a minute. A market clearing price is set automatically and bids are awarded, and it continues like that on a real-time basis. Now, clearly, this is impossible to do if you run an old-style utility where you have long-term contracts that remain in place for a very long time. And this trend, therefore, I think is going to be one of the characteristics where there's an incredibly dynamic, computer-driven ability to optimize and match buyers and sellers on a real-time basis. And that's a trend that's already very much alive and well in the developed world. And I think we have the benefit of learning from some of those best-in-class technologies that are now available. But we have a way to go in South Africa. We have quite a long road to travel to get there, given the fact that we, up until very recently, still were this vertically integrated electricity utility company. And we are now at a point where we have to make the transition. The Department of Public Enterprises published a roadmap to the future of a electricity supply industry in South Africa towards the end of 2019, and that envisaged the restructuring of Eskom into three different parts: generation, transmission, and distribution. And in particular, the setting up of an independent transmission entity, a so-called ITSMO, an independent transmission system and market operator, which would allow for this matchmaking between buyer and seller to be done on a basis that affords transparency, very much like the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is a platform on which you can match buyers and sellers and arrive at a mutually acceptable price. And of course, that foresees a much more dynamic future going forward. So that process we have started, and it's one of the 5 priorities that we've got for our turnaround plan. Let me quickly go through what those 5 are. So the first is to become operationally excellent. For a number of years, Eskom has been characterized by poor availability of, in particular, its generation facilities. Transmission and distribution tend to do quite well in terms of global benchmarks, and we're very proud of the performance of those 2 divisions from an operational perspective. Having said that, they require capital investment, and we will need to grow, in particular, our transmission grid more as the trend towards more distributed generation takes place. But generation is the one entity that is most closely associated with this very regrettable phenomenon that we in South Africa call load shedding. And I just had a video call with a gentleman in the US, and he was saying that in Texas, due to the cold snap that they currently experience, they have a variety of load shedding that they call load curtailment. So it's just a word with, I guess, more syllables. But the effect is very much the same, as that you have the distributed shedding of load across your grid on a rotational basis in order to avoid a nationwide blackout from which the grid will take a number of weeks to recover. So that's something that we need to avoid pretty much at all costs. We recognize that load shedding is a phenomenon that is the cause of hardship to the country, to the economy, to factories, to businesses, to households. And it's something that we only apply as the last resort. It's not something that we do lightly. It is certainly something that we want to avoid. But what we've got is a fleet of power stations that are on average 39 years old. They've lived a very hard life. So if you think of a car's rev counter, we've run these cars pretty much with the rev counter in the red for the majority of their lives. So the energy utilization factor, which is really a measure of how much in the red you've run, is significantly above international standards. And that has contributed to a lack of reliability of those power stations, exacerbated by a lack of maintenance. And that lack of maintenance, where we have not done the required midlife refurbishments, has added to a generation system where we are today that is not reliable and not as predictable as we would like it to be. And of course, for that reason, we have launched what we call the Reliability Maintenance Recovery Program, which is intended to catch up on these on this backlog of maintenance programs. And this backlog is significant. We have kicked off the program in earnest around about September of last year, and we have stepped up our maintenance program to a very significant extent. When I joined Eskom in January of last year, at the first system briefing, we warned the South African public that we had to catch up on maintenance. If we didn't do the required maintenance, the risk of load shedding would become ever greater. And that while we conducted this catch-up, there was regrettably an increased risk of load shedding. So while we take these units offline to conduct the much-needed maintenance, unfortunately, the risk of load shedding does go up. But once we've completed this program of reliability maintenance, we will be able to significantly reduce, but not entirely eliminate, let me stress that, the risk of load shedding going forward. So the first tranche of units that we've taken offline, they will be brought back online by April of this year. And then we should already see a step change in the risk of load shedding. The following tranche will then be taken off, also maintained. And we anticipate that by September of this year, we should see a substantial reduction in the risk of load shedding. However, as the President has said in his State of the Nation address, there is an inherent shortfall in capacity that we need to bridge. Now, we have done part of that bridging of the capacity shortfall by constructing the 2 mega projects. Actually, there were 3, Medupi, Kusile, and then the pumped storage scheme at Ingula. And those projects have come online later than planned. They were started too late, and they suffered from many of the ills that I referred to earlier when I spoke about mega projects and the challenges of executing mega projects. And because they were done under a lot of schedule pressure, the quality of the design work was not what it should have been. So design errors crept in. These now have to be fixed, and that process is on the go. So in Medupi, we have put into commercial operation 5 out of the 6 units. Unit 1 should come into commercial operation by the second calendar quarter of this year. And we are also implementing a number of fixes to the mills, the boilers, in order to address some of these known design defects. Now, this is an extensive exercise. It takes a 75-day outage per plant, and it also takes a lot of money, 300 million rand per unit that we consecutively take offline. At the same time, we are completing the Kusile plant. We have brought 2 units into commercial operation there. Unit 2 came into commercial operation in October of last year. And by July of this year, we'll bring Unit 3 online, and then the other remaining 3 units will come after that, with Unit 6, the very last unit, coming online somewhere in 2024. So we are putting additional capacity on the grid. But bear in mind that as we bring this additional capacity on the grid, we also have to decommission some of these older plants. And that creates a capacity shortfall, which is necessary to address. So from an operational excellence perspective, we are paying attention to every element of running a reliable plant. We are looking at availability of spares. We're looking at partnerships with original equipment manufacturers. We are looking at improving the quality and outcome of our maintenance programs. So an enormous amount of hard work that goes into that. The second part, or the second top priority of our turnaround plan, is our income statement. Now, our income statement is under pressure. We were able to report a very modest profit for the first half of the current financial year, but that profit is not going to be sustained. So we will again this year be reporting a substantial net after-tax loss. And this is something that needs to be rectified. Now, if you look at the elements of your income statement, we first of all need to do something about our revenue. Now, the quantum of electricity that we sell has, for a fairly long time now, remained pretty flat, and that is attributable to a lack of growth in the economy. And there's a debate going on whether or not this lack of growth is attributable to a lack of reliable electricity, or whether there's just not enough of a growth driver in the economy. And I'm not an economist, so I don't want to make a pronouncement on that. Safe to say.
All right, we're going to come out of that brief